Rejoice, episode 156, Shells and Ships. Hello, I'm Frank Delaney, and here we are, the end of Chapter 3, which I began on the 29th of February, 2012. That's what, 15 months or thereabouts? And bear in mind, it's one of the shortest chapters in Ulysses, and though dense in reference, it's not as totally subterranean, not as dense, as some others ahead of us. So here we go. Here's the first chunk of this week's extract. This is Stephen again on the Sandymount Strand, and again this goes in and out between Joyce's narrative and Stephen's thoughts. He took the hilt of his ash plant, lunging with it softly, dallying still. Yes, evening will find itself in me, without me. All days make their end. By the way, when is it, Tuesday? Will be the longest day. Of all the glad New Year, mother, the rum-tum, tiddly-tum. Lon Tennyson, gentleman poet. Yeah! For the old hag with the yellow teeth. And Monsieur Dumont, gentleman journalist. Yeah! My teeth are very bad. Why, I wonder? Oh, feel. That one is going to. Shells. Ought I go to a dentist, I wonder, with that money? That one. This. Toothless Kinch, the Superman. Why is that, I wonder? Or does it mean something, perhaps? There we go. Not totally obscure, just a few things to observe. He took the hilt of his ash plant, lunging with it softly, dallying still. The ash plant is his walking stick, his staff, his divining rod. I'll just remind you that an ash plant is a length like a walking stick cut from a young ash tree and typically used by a drover to urge on his cattle. Stephen is lingering a little, somewhat reluctant to leave the peace and fantasy of Sandymount Strand and make his way into Dublin, to be bullied and jibed at again by Buck Mulligan, and lunging with it suggests a swordsman. He's had a sexual fantasy, and he might be practicing dueling with Mulligan, parrying his thrusts. What was the thought in Chapter 1? He fears the lancet of my art. Yes, that's right. Next sentence. Yes, evening will find itself in me without me. This is Shelley's verse drama. Hellas again. We had it last week, and in fact, we've had it a number of times. And follow love's folding star to the evening land, meaning night. Lovely phrase. Look, by the way, at the phrasing. The thought of inevitability is wrapped up both introvertedly and extrovertedly. And there's a beautiful play on words. Without me means if I weren't there, or outside of me. Out with, without. It's a usage you'll find in Scotland still, though reversed, out with me. It's a very useful usage. I wish we had more of it. Next few sentences are interesting. A cluster with a self-interruption. Stephen thinking, all days make their end, takes us into the cluster. So I'll deal with the interruption first. After he thinks, all days make their end, he thinks, by the way, when is it? Tuesday will be the longest day. The 16th of June, 1904 was a Thursday. And in Ireland, the longest day of the year is always the 21st of June, which in 1904 was the following Tuesday. And now the cluster. Tennyson wrote a mighty poem called Ulysses, and in it you will find a stave of jingles and jangles relating to this part of Chapter 3. I'll give you some quotes from the poem. This is my son, mine own Telemachus, to whom I leave the sceptre and the isle. And Stephen is carrying a sceptre, is he not, his ash plant, on the island of Ireland, and there's an island out there in Dublin Bay. There lies the port of the vessel puffs her sail, says the poem. Stephen has earlier seen the mailboat that plies between Dublin and Liverpool. And listen to this. The long day wanes, the slow moon climbs, the deep moans round with many voices. Come, my friends, 'tis not too late to seek a newer world. And it's overlapping with Homer all the time, isn't it? And then, what do we get next? Here we go. Of all the glad New Year, mother, the rum-tum tiddly-tum. Of all the glad New Year, mother, the rum-tum tiddly-tum. This is from the May Queen, also by Alfred Lord Tennyson, the great Victorian poet, and the May Queen also contains these lines. He thought I was a ghost, mother, for I was all in white, and I ran by him without speaking, like a flash of light. They call me cruel-hearted, but I care not what they say, for I am to be Queen of the May, mother, I am to be Queen of the May. Mulligan has already criticized Stephen for being cruel when Stephen's mother was dying. And of course, Lorne Tennyson, gentleman poet, a typical Joycean play on words, and a typical Joycean disrespect for a poet who, not long before Joyce's time, had vast stature, and died when Joyce was 10, and he'd have been more than aware of that great event at its funeral. Now comes a single word, repeated in the next line, G-I-A, with an accent on it, Italian for already. But, as with so much in that language dominated by the need for instant expressiveness, it also means other things, such as, come on, move it, we should be there already, let's go. Next, Stephen's urging himself on, that's all that is. Next, for the old hag with the yellow teeth, and Monsieur Drummond, gentleman journalist. Stephen is thinking about his teeth here. Do you remember? I told you, was it last week? To watch the line about shells? And if you look back to episode 124 of these podcasts, you'll find that Edouard Drummond, an irreverent French journalist, called Queen Victoria the hag with the yellow teeth, vieille ogresse, the old ogress. Tennyson, of course, was Queen Victoria's poet laureate. So you see how it all melds and locks in like a Rubik's Cube. So Stephen, after giving himself another urging forward, thanks, my teeth are very bad. Why, I wonder? Feel. And he's moving his tongue around inside his mouth. And he's thinking, that one is going to. And he's thinking, my teeth are like shells. And he asks himself, ought I go to a dentist, I wonder, with that money? So he's running his tongue over the cavities in his teeth, his hollow teeth, which he likens to shells. That one, checks another one, this, you can almost feel his tongue reaching for the gaps in his hollow teeth. And the money refers to the cash he's just received from Mr. Deasy at the school in Doki in Chapter 2. Very difficult for us to grasp just how bad dental care would have been in the Ireland of 1904. Next line, Toothless Kinch the Superman. Why is that, I wonder? Or does it mean something, perhaps? Two separate thoughts there, merged into one. And the sentence, Toothless Kinch the Superman, it refers to two things. The nickname that Mulligan gave Stephen in Chapter 1, because according to Mulligan, it sounded like a knife blade. In fact, a kinch is the child of a convict or a hooker. But also, if you have no teeth, you have no edge. And the Superman reference, well, that's also from Chapter 1, the Ubermensch, the missing rib. It's in podcast episode number 52. I think where Mulligan actually calls Stephen Toothless Kinch. Joyce, of course, had bad teeth himself. The very word teeth. I mean, this is how you really know. The very word teeth comes into Ulysses 46 times. When he was 25, he wrote to his brother from Italy, my mouth is full of decayed teeth, and my soul of decayed ambitions. That's very, very young James Joyce. You could imagine that line in A Portrait of the Artist. But there's an overarching connection too, and this is important. It's Stephen's anxiety. And we know that Joyce read Freud, whose interpretation of dreams, with all he wrote in it about teeth as anxiety, came out in 1899. And nobody was as interested in dreams and their interpretation as Joyce, no matter how much he pretended to dismiss Freud. Hence Stephen's thought. Does it mean something, perhaps? Last passages from Chapter 3, very straightforward. Stephen's thinking, my handkerchief. He threw it, I remember. Did I not take it up? His hand groped vainly in his pockets. No, I didn't. Better buy one. He laid the dry snot picked from his nostril on a ledge of rock carefully. For the rest, let look who will. Behind, Perhaps there is someone? He turned his face over a shoulder. Regardons. Moving through the air, high spars of a three-master. Her sails brailed up on the cross-trees, homing, upstream, silently moving, a silent ship. And that's the last line in the chapter. Stephen reaches into his pocket for a handkerchief to wipe his nose, but of course he gave it to Mulligan in chapter 1 to wipe off shaving cream. Self-explanatory. My handkerchief. He threw it, I remember. Did I not take it up? Now Joyce inserts himself as narrator. His hand groped vainly in his pockets, and now Stephen's thought, no, I didn't. Better buy one. He didn't retrieve his handkerchief. So he picks the dried mucus from his nose. He laid the dry snot picked from his nostril on a ledge of rock carefully. He's self-conscious. That's how anxious this young man Stephen Dedalus is. He's afraid someone will see him and disapprove. And who might see him? None but the gypsies and their dog. Nevertheless, he looks furtively behind him. Behind. Perhaps there is someone. He turned his face over a shoulder, regardant, looking behind him, in other words. Remember that we've had in this chapter a number of references to heraldry? Well, this is yet one more. Regardons. And sometimes, especially in old French usage of heraldry, regardant denotes an animal on a shield looking over its shoulder, as Stephen is doing now. Oh, what does he see? Well, here comes this lovely sentence, with, by the way, a technical error in it. Moving through the air, high spars of a three-master, her sails brailed up on the cross-trees, homing, upstream, silently moving, a silent ship. She is the Rose Veen. She has come from Somerset in England with a cargo of bricks. She will presently dock in Dublin, and we will see her again. The technical error? Frank Budgeon, Joyce's artist friend in Switzerland, pointed out that sails are never brailed, that is to say, roped or trussed to the cross-trees, because the cross-trees are the small spars high up near the masthead. That they're roped or trussed to what are called the yards, the great horizontal spars on a schooner's masts. Joyce didn't and wouldn't change it, because he said he wanted the crucifixion allusion. And remember that we are still pegged to Homer's Odyssey, which is all about ships and homecomings. And here are the last phrases: homing, upstream, silently moving, a silent ship. End of chapter. I began chapter 3 on February last year, 2012. What a ride it's been. I'm fully aware. That could easily have been twice as long, and that was the temptation I had to resist. Joyce's references have references inside them. What is it? Big fleas have little fleas upon their backs to bite them. Little fleas have littler fleas, and so ad infinitum. And I do hope that amid all my digressions, I didn't miss anything major or crucial. I believe, I hope that I hit every sentence. In 2 days from now, that's on Friday next, we'll put up episode 156A. It's time for a baker's dozen. There's been another 12 podcasts. And 156A is a departure, and I have something to tell you. This latest baker's dozen, it's the introduction to the first ebook of these podcasts. Many listeners, as you'd hear me say in the introduction, have asked for something to read as well as to hear. And so we're putting up the first 13 episodes, the first baker's dozen. It's a kind of an experiment. We'll launch the ebooks on the 16th of June or thereabouts to mark Bloomsday. I'll give you more details as the time approaches. And here next week, in the usual podcast slot, that will be number 157, I'll do a summary of Chapter 3. And the week after that, as we begin Year 4, guess what? We'll meet, for the first time, lovely Mr. Leopold Bloom. I can't wait. Don't miss it. Join me next week. Rejoice, episode 156A. Now read as well as listen. Hello, I'm Frank Delaney. Baker's dozen time again, and this one's a bit different. From time to time, some of you have asked whether I have any plans to publish in book form the transcripts of these podcasts. Well, For Bloomsday this year, that's in 9 days' time, I'm putting up the first ebook. It's the first baker's dozen from these podcasts. And if you have all the downloads, you'll now have all the transcripts of that first 13. To make sure you have everything, I'm taking the introduction from that ebook for this baker's dozen edition, and it's all self-explanatory. One note, it's possible that the next ebook, after this first one, will have many, many more podcasts in it. We depend to some extent on your comments. As to purchasing the ebook, watch my website for written details of where it will be available. I can tell you that it will certainly be on Amazon.com for $3.99, cheaper the price. Here we go. The introduction to Joyce eBooks, Volume 1. Introduction. To be blunt, Ulysses addles readers. It has sown confusion and frustration since the day the novel was published in Paris on Thursday, the 2nd of February 1922. Whether you're a student who has to grapple with it for English literature, or you're searching for thesis material, or you prefer your novels serious and would simply like to understand James Joyce's great work, the same question lashes you with its scaly tail. How do you crack open a book that's most famous for being shut tight? Do you give up because you can't be bothered to make the infamous effort to get through it, much though you'd like to know what goes on in the novel? Do you troll the academic works and the multiple biographies of Joyce in the hope of finding a way in? Or perhaps you'll have one more go at it, and then, in the word of Joyce's friend and younger contemporary Samuel Beckett, fail again, fail better. There's no doubt that Ulysses is considered one of the most difficult books ever written. What's also clear is that the author wanted it opaque and even downright obscure. Not long after it appeared, to fanfares and controversy equally, a young French journalist, Jacques Benoist-Méchin, began to translate Ulysses. Attempting to pry open the text, he visited James Joyce in Paris and probed for some core definition, some superior way of tagging the book. He met limited success. Joyce said to him, "If I gave it all up immediately, I'd lose my immortality. I've put in so many enigmas and puzzles that it will keep the professors busy for centuries arguing over what I meant, and that's the only way of ensuring one's immortality." Note the self-confidence, by the way. He assumed professorial interest. The first Ulysses century hasn't yet passed, and the professors are still arguing. On all the evidence, they'll likely continue to do so for eons. Therefore, Mr. Joyce has gone a long way toward pulling off his famous trick. How did he do it? In a way, he told us that too. A young Dublin man who knew him in Paris, Arthur Power, had writerly ambitions. Joyce told him to study the Book of Kells, of which he possessed a facsimile copy. In all the places I've been to, Rome, Zurich, Trieste, I've taken it about with me and have pored over its workmanship for hours. It is the most purely Irish thing we have, and some of the big initial letters, which swing right across a page, have the essential quality of a chapter of Ulysses. Indeed, you can compare much of my work to the intricate illuminations. The monks who wrote and illustrated that great manuscript 1,300 years ago had the intention, in part, of inducing religious trance. If you couldn't read, you could stare at a page carpeted with holy pictures, run your finger along the winding trails of their gorgeous embellishments, and contemplate the divinity of Jesus Christ and the lives of the saints. To this day, it remains a total delight. Multicolored decorations scamper or stride here and there in whorls, capitals, triskells, curlicues. They may seem to meander like dandies, but they all serve their creator's great purpose as they inhabit their pages with vividness, flamboyance, and delicacy. Who could have believed that those austere men in their cold monasteries, with their coarse robes and tonsure haircuts, had such beautiful, thoughtful style, and such control of it? So, yes, Joyce had a point when he compared Ulysses to the Book of Kells. In other ways, and in other shapes, he was one of those scribes. But there's a major difference. When you look at the glorious pages that the monks made, you can see each moment, You can trace a line to its attempted infinity. You can imagine the honeysuckle tendril that inspired it. You can perceive what's going on. Most of Ulysses, however, remains subterranean. It's the life beneath the text that gives the book its gripping depth. It's like an elevator ride down a mineshaft of multiple galleries, each tunnel glittering with precious stones. And so the gauntlet that Joyce threw down made a mighty clang. But the professors took it up. They took Joyce at his word. It's impossible perhaps to count, but you might do well with a bet that no other writer, except maybe Shakespeare, has spawned so much academic work. Across literary study, Joyce has amounted to an industry. The main thrust of Joycean scholarship has been at least as cerebral as Joyce himself, and often to great benefit. Time after time, the scholars have pursued questions raised by the text in order to go off and examine some other aspect of literature, or any of the world's osophies or ologies. The Joyce industry has produced fabulous, in every sense, and often powerful works of initiative and response, the twin pillars of scholarship. Multifariously they ask, but is he not making this connection? Did he mean that allusion? Or was his intention something other? As to whether this has all gone any measurable distance toward opening up Ulysses, it's not so much that one should ask if the novel has been unmasked in the thousands of papers, dissertations, seminars, conferences, summer schools. It's more that one should stand back, admire the diligence, and observe the sheer volume of ideas that Joyce has stimulated. His scholars may have been surfing his tide, but they've started a few waves of their own. Enter now a delicious irony. Much Joycean study has climbed far above Joyce's own cerebral plateau. Misery, they say, loves company. In the same vein, inaccessibility adores obscurity. Much of the work spawned by Ulysses is full of new enigmas. Of course, has played right into Joyce's hands. The scholars have done what he asked them to do. They've cherished the great and grand gift he gave them. A crucial element, however, remains missing from this bargain. Democracy, meaning the greatest good of the widest readership. None of the intellectually valuable and often enjoyable argument has been of much use to that common but elusive creature, the ordinary reader. Perhaps as a consequence, and perhaps daunted by or respectful of his famous 300 years remark, the professors have done little enough arguing on a practical line-by-line basis. Indeed, if you've always been frustrated by Joyce's unreachability, the Joyce industry bibliographies and lists may daunt you further, because many of the titles spawned by Ulysses would in themselves seem to make his 300-year challenge a modest span. I think it was John Updike who began a review of Roland Barthes with the sentence, "Roland Barthes has written an unreadable book about reading." Wide, easy access has a thin time of it here, too. That's modernism for you, some would sneer, and postmodernism, and deconstructionism, and post-deconstructionism, and so on. Yet, there's always been room with Joyce, multifarious Joyce, universal Joyce, to think again and not be at all daunted. On the face of it, he did seem to mean that everybody but the professors keep off the grass. Therefore, on the face of it, he wasn't interested in democracy. Not true. This is the man who also claimed that the people he wrote about were waiters and porters and fruit sellers, what he calls in Ulysses the 100-headed rabble of the cathedral close. Which suggests that we should look at his remark another way, as indeed we have to look at Ulysses in multiple ways. The central phrase needs unpicking. He did not say that he wanted to keep out the professors. He specifically sought to make them argue over the enigmas and puzzles. As well as a malicious wink, I'm seeing a license there, a way of not being too put off by or too respectful of his wishes. Suppose we break that will and testament. Suppose we assure ourselves that it's not heresy to try and demolish his rather arch remark, especially if we do it not for arguing, but for a sincere reason, which is to render the book more accessible, and thus spread and intensify an even greater respect for Joyce. What artist doesn't want his audience to examine and appreciate? Delightful, in theory, easier said than done. Given the complexities of his genius, can one possibly unravel every whorl, pursue every tendril to its end, excavate every buried reference without fail? Ulysses has phrases, sometimes no more than 3 or 4 words long, so rich in references, so deep, that it can take hours to drag them to the surface. Whatever the difficulty, that's what I've been doing since Bloomsday, the 16th of June, 2010, in an exercise named the pun-appropriate Rejoice. For fun, for my own sheer delight, I've been attempting a line-by-line dissection of Ulysses in greater detail than I've seen. I'm not the first to do so, and this is not a competition. 1 or 2 other runners and riders have traveled outstanding distances in the field, but I'm led to believe that I may be the most intentionally approachable, and so far, the most comprehensive. My enthusiasm, it seems, has proven infectious, and I believe that I've established the democratic point of the interested ordinary reader. As I write this, we have knowledge, via my website and iTunes, of approximately 750,000 Rejoice downloads. That same audience response has occasioned this ebook. People have been asking for something they can read as well as hear. Nothing could please me more. My own favorite way of grasping Shakespeare is to get a good cast recording and follow the text as I listen. In this mix of media, all kinds of stuff floats to the surface. Here, accordingly, you'll find a text assembly, transcripts essentially, of the first Baker's Dozen of Rejoice. Baker's Dozen because after every 12th podcast, I upload an essay on some aspect of Joyce. Originally, I thought I'd inject such a special every 10 editions, as the text says, but then, given the flow that was beginning, it felt too frequent and too interruptive. And why only 13 episodes? Why not more in this ebook? I opted for this length because the internet palette has been sampling different types of self-published works, and the Kindle single model, for instance, on Amazon, will run somewhere between 10,000 and 20,000 words, a bracket into which falls the length of this ebook. I warn you, though, as the series settled down, the podcasts grew longer, partly because of the text's increasing density, and partly because aficionados wanted it. Future Rejoice ebooks will thus be longer, and we intend 4 a year. Always a baker's dozen. One day there may even be a print version of everything so far, and beyond. To judge from the copious inquiries, the building of the podcasts warrants some comment, principally concerning the text I use. These first episodes have a certain tentativeness, for a reason. When I began, I leaned toward the 1934 Random House and the 1960 Bodley Head editions, because I had thumbed them so hard for so many years. But after much comparison, I soon gave way to the 1986 impression of the 1984 edition by Hans Walter Gabler. I also draw on the original handwritten draft in Joyce's hand that's housed in the wonderful Rosenbach Museum in Philadelphia. Its facsimile lies open all the time on the table beside my desk. Seeing Joyce's sloping handwriting is enough to send me, and I'm quoting him here, charging on the land. In the early days, which stretch beyond the content of this ebook, the use of multiple editions caused some errors. For example, grey when it should have been great. And as these became more frequent, I looked at fewer editions and came to depend upon the Gabler. If you listen as you read, you'll probably find other tiny discrepancies here and there. Actual laughter doesn't work well on the page. You may even note a gap now and then. Not all my digressions warrant an appearance in print. Also, these pieces were written for the ear, and from time to time this may accordingly cause the eye to blink. As to process, as you will see, and may already have heard, I take my pace from the text. The denser the references, the smaller the quotation, and the slower the pace. Sometimes, more evidently in later podcasts, I've succeeded in excavating no more than perhaps 2 or 3 brief phrases. In general, I draw on 4 principal sources, the novel itself, obviously, the classical frame on which Joyce stretched it, the Odyssey by Homer. I like the Samuel Butler edition because I read it so often in childhood. The Yale Shakespeare Complete Works, edited by Wilbur Cross and Tucker Brook, and Richard Ellman's peerless biography, James Joyce. Myriad other sources come into play. Frank Budgeon, Stuart Gilbert, Hugh Kenner, the somewhat interdependent teams of Weldon Thornton, followed by Don Gifford and Robert Seidman. Biographies from the period of gestation and publication, multiple volumes of letters written by Joyce and others, and I am terribly needful of one resource in particular, any Dublin newspaper, ideally the Freeman's Journal, for Thursday, the 16th of June, 1904. In terms of style, I have preserved Joyce's form of indentation, a French convention, where the opening of a dialogue sentence begins with a dash rather than parentheses, but is not repeated where the dialogue is continued within the paragraph, and I have not indented the dialogue lines because he didn't. One question dominates all inquiries. How long will this unraveling exercise take? Impossible to say. I work entirely alone, and my rate of progress may not necessarily be a guide. For instance, the first 3 chapters have taken 3 years to the day to unpack, but chapter 3 has taken roughly twice as long as either of the other 2. Looking ahead, I can see that I shall be able to dance through, say, chapter 4, maybe 5, but I will of a certainty be wading through chapters 9, 14, and 18. Therefore, I can but guess. Shall we say 25 years? And if I finish earlier than that, I might be tempted to take on Finnegan's Wake. My estimate of that rate of unraveling would be, let me see, a page a year. And that's the end of this introduction to Rejoice eBooks Volume 1. It's available from mid-June on Amazon at $3.99 per download. Join me this coming Friday for the regular weekly podcast of Rejoice. Rejoice, episode 157, Proteus Redux. Hello, I'm Frank Delaney. Now, I haven't done this with the previous 2 chapters. I haven't devoted an entire broadcast to thinking back over a chapter. But I figure that it might be useful because we've spent a lot of complex time on Proteus. That's the name Joyce gave to his 3rd chapter or episode. He didn't give it, I'll remind you, at the time of writing. He only gave it afterwards when pressed to offer some kind of idea as to his structure for Ulysses and his general intent. In these first 3 chapters, Stephen Dedalus is front and center, and the section is sometimes called the Telemachiad or Telemachiad, after Telemachus, the son of Odysseus, who goes looking for his father, the wanderer Odysseus. And in that verbal embrace of the word Telemachiad, Joyce sets up one of the major themes of Ulysses. Some would argue that it's the major theme, that is, the father-son relationship in general, and Stephen Dedalus' search for the position of son in life and the universe. He, as Joyce himself had, has a feckless father. And so, in the first 3 chapters, we get all kinds of dual and triadic and multiple thematic echoes. Stephen as wayward son who refuses to grant his dying mother's wish. Stephen contemplating Hamlet, who is asked by his father's ghost, after all, to murder people. Good dad to have, eh? Stephen's subterranean thoughts on the Christian religion's core trinity of God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Ghost, or the Holy Spirit. Stephen, the young teacher, finding the father figure of the headmaster, Garadisi, in chapter 2, finding him ill-informed, bombastic, laughably opinionated, and generally unsatisfactory. Not to mention, of course, the young Telemachus, son of the wanderer Odysseus, whose name among the Romans was Ulysses, or Ulysses. The father-son theme will, in due course, become resolved fully and beautifully by the end of the novel, but we're many, many years away from that. Joyce communicated a view of the third chapter to his friend Frank Budgeon, an English painter in Zurich. "You catch the drift of the thing?" Joyce said to him. "It's the struggle with Proteus. Change is the theme. Everything changes. Sea, sky, man, animals. The words change too. Well, it's about a great many other things as well, of course. In practical terms, Chapter 3 is, on one level, about Stephen's difficult eyesight. He's lost his spectacles, and he has to peer at everything. And you know how, when you have to peer at things, they can become miasma-like and hazy. And it's noon or thereabouts by the sea on a warm summer day, a time and a place where you're likely to get a miasma-like light and sensation. And the point about change here is that everything is undefined, not untypically unclear. Change brings uncertainty. There's a wonderful metaphor for change early on in the chapter when Stephen walks along Sandymount Strand with his eyes shut. Talk about not knowing, or indeed testing where you're going. A friend of mine in New York told me how he and his pals used to play a game. Who dares keep their eyes shut the longest while driving a car in the city? Here, though, as Joyce romps among the philosophers, we have the ancient philosophical question. If you can't see something, does it exist? Is it only real when you can see it and give shape to it? If a tree falls in the forest, etc. What is particularly interesting in Chapter 3, and to me compelling, is how Joyce employs, I'm going to make a mangled word here, how he employs unclarity to reach for memory and fantasy and fear. And the philosophy of it is not real until and unless you see it. Stephen recalls his days in Paris and an old Irish Republican bomb thrower, name of Kevin Egan. And the past of that man is now a vivid memory for Stephen from his days in Paris, and the memory arrests him. And we are given a series of imaginative, word association almost, paragraphs about Paris that are poetic, arresting, and half resolved. Now, if every reference of memory of Paris that Stephen calls up were to be unpacked and written in a prosaic, linear form, it would run to several pages long, and it wouldn't be as interesting. Likewise, his imagined visit to an uncle who lives near Sandymount Strand where the entire physical action of the chapter takes place. And likewise, he imagines the lives of the people he sees. The two women at first, who, he first imagines, are midwives out from the city who want to bury a stillborn or aborted fetus in the deep sands. And in each case, we are set up to ask, do they exist? Or do they only exist at the moment when Stephen engages with them? And as a counterweight to these views through memory, Stephen's greatest and most powerful act of imagination so far comes at the sight of two gypsies. They are real. He can see them. He can feel a true reality, fear at the sight of their dog. In one of the most memorable phrases, not just in the chapter, but in the entire novel, Joyce describes them. You'll find it in, I think it's my episode 138. Here it is again. I'll quote it for you. Shouldering their bags, they trudged, the red Egyptians. His blued feet, out of turned-up trousers, slapped the clammy sand, a dull brick muffler strangling his unshaven neck. With woman's steps she followed, the ruffian and his strolling mort, spoils slung at her back. Loose sand and shell grit crusted her bare feet. About her windrow face hair trailed. And this is what I like. Joyce has taken the philosophical idea, the ineluctable modality of the visible. You cannot deny or avoid what you see. And its long life, from Aristotle down to Berkeley and later philosophers, and he's used it to connect to the imagination. because he now utilizes the real, true, unavoidable sight of the two Egyptians, that is to say, gypsy cockle pickers, and has Stephen do as core and intimate a thing as a human may do. He extracts a sexual fantasy from them. He imagines that the man is a pimp and the woman a whore who is at her trade at night time under the arches of old Dublin, even as her husband is lining up her next two clients, a pair of soldiers, in a named pub, O'Loughlin of Blackpits. A dull brick muffler strangling his unshaven neck. Wonderful. You actually see the man. Show, don't tell. I wonder if anybody's ever counted the number of dissertations, articles, and even books that have uncoiled from Chapter 3 of Ulysses. There are many. For me, though, as a working novelist, one of the chapter's highest resonances is how completely we see Stephen. We are inside his mind as never before, and by the end of the chapter, he is more or less completely characterized. We could make a good guess at how he might react to many circumstances, and that's a definition of completeness in characterization. And so, we are enabled to go forward into the novel, free to meet the second of the three central characters of the book. The city of Dublin I contend, is the third character. While Stephen is out around Dublin on hold, so to speak, and whenever we again glimpse him or meet him, we know what to expect. We know what kind of company we're keeping. Next week, meet Mr. Bloom of Bloomsday. Rejoice, episode 158. Enter Mr. Bloom. Hello, I'm Frank Delaney. At the beginning of year 4 of these podcasts, we begin chapter 4 of Ulysses, and we meet Mr. Leopold Bloom, the gentle Dublin Jew who is Joyce's hero. Yes, hero is the word I like to use. Certainly Mr. Bloom is Joyce's main protagonist in terms of how often he's on the page compared to Stephen Dedalus. Now, usually, as regular listeners know, I read out a short passage and try to dissect it. But we might have a simpler time of it in this chapter than we had in chapter 3. So what I'll do is, I'll read until I'm stopped dead by any opacity or duality, which I'll clarify in brackets, so to speak, and then I'll carry on. I'm fascinated to find out how long this technique will last. So here we go. It's morning in Dublin at number 7 Eccles Street, just north of the city centre, where Leopold Bloom lives, a 38-year-old freelance salesman of advertising. All will become clear. He's downstairs in his kitchen with his cat. His wife Marion, Molly Bloom, is upstairs in a bed that jingles as she moves, and Mr. Bloom is contemplating breakfast. Here we go. Here's the text. Mr. Leopold Bloom ate with relish the inner organs of beasts and fowls. He liked thick giblet soup, nutty gizzards, a stuffed roast heart, liver slices fried with crust crumbs, fried hen cod's roes. Most of all, he liked grilled mutton kidneys, which gave to his palate a fine tang of faintly scented urine. Okay, brackets. Let me speak in brackets here, so to speak. It's a very famous passage. Ate with relish? Well, that may be a play on words. It may mean that Mr. Bloom smacked his lips in delight. And it may also mean that he spread on his food a sauce called Yorkshire relish, which is very fine. I commend it. The gizzard is the second stomach of a fowl, or the cooked entrails of a bird. And there's also a similar word in Hebrew regarding cooked food. Back to the text. Kidneys were in his mind as he moved about the kitchen softly, writing her breakfast things on the humpy tray. Gelid light and air were in the kitchen, but out of doors gentle summer morning everywhere made him feel a bit peckish. Brackets again. Love that word gelid, and it's interesting that Joyce uses it here out of season because it means very cold or chilly, but he's using it in the sense of how brilliantly clear the light is on a frosty morning, and the kitchen at number 7 Eccles Street, the Bloom household, well, it may be just a little cool. And peckish is straightforward, an edge of hunger, not the full blast. You could just peck at something. Back to the text. The coals were reddening. Another slice of bread and butter, 3, 4, right. She didn't like her plate full, right. He turned from the tray, lifted the kettle off the hob, and set it sideways on the fire. It sat there, dull and squat, its spout stuck out. Cup of tea soon, good, mouth dry. You can tell what's going on, can't you? He's preparing a breakfast tray for his wife Molly upstairs in bed. A man who took his wife breakfast in bed was supposed to be the epitome of an excellent husband. And here we're seeing the early reaches of Bloom's famous interior monologue. But be careful. There are moments when it seems that Joyce can't make up his mind as to whether it's narration or interior monologue. And I think he's showing Mr. Bloom, a man full of decency and emotional pain, speaking to himself in the third person. He's kind of splitting all kinds of differences here. Back to the text. The cat walked stiffly round a leg of the table with tail on high. Meow. Just a note here on Joyce's gift of onomatopoeia. You begin to believe that he could take any sound and put it on the page. It happens over and over again in Ulysses. Just wait until we come to the overture in the Silence chapter. I mean, the G-N-A-O in the cat's mew. Perfect. Or should I say perfect. Watch out also, by the way, for the phallic symbols in which Ulysses abounds. There's a troubled sexual relationship between Mr. and Mrs. Bloom, and here you have a spout and a cat's high, erect tail. Text again. Oh, there you are, Mr. Bloom said, turning from the fire. The cat mewed in answer, and stalked again stiffly round a leg of the table, mewing. Just how she stalks over my writing table. Brrr. Scratch my head. Brrr. Mr. Bloom watched curiously, kindly, the lithe black form. Clean to see, the gloss of her sleek hide, the white button under the butt of her tail, the green flashing eyes. He bent down to her, his hands on his knees. Milk for the pussins, he said. Meow, the cat cried again. They call them stupid. They understand what we say better than we understand them. She understands all she wants to. Vindictive, too. Cruel. Her nature. Curious mice never squeal. Seem to like it. Wonder what I look like to her. Height of a tower? No. She can jump me. Afraid of the chickens, she is, he said mockingly. Afraid of the chook-chooks. I never saw such a stupid pussins as the pussins. Meow, the cat said loudly. She blinked up out of her avid, shame-closing eyes, mewing plaintively and long, showing him her milk-white teeth. He watched the dark eye-slits narrowing with greed till her eyes were green stones. Then he went to the dresser, took the jug Hanlon's milkman had just filled for him, poured warm bubbled milk on a saucer, and set it slowly on the floor. Great description, by the way, of a cat's face, isn't it? And isn't shame-closing good? Shame-closing eyes? And there was a Hanlon's dairy on Dorset Street, round the corner from Bloom's house. Grrr, she cried, running to lap. He watched the bristles, shining wirily in the weak light, as she tipped 3 times and licked lightly. Wonder is it true if you clip them they can mouse after? Why? They shine in the dark, perhaps, the tips? Or kind of feelers in the dark, perhaps? I grew up with this kind of lore. We believed as kids that if you clipped a cat's whiskers, she couldn't measure the apertures she wanted to go through. He listened to her licking lap. Ham and eggs? No, no good eggs with this drought. Want pure fresh water. Thursday, not a good day either for a mutton kidney at Buckley's. Fried with butter, shake a pepper. Better a pork kidney at Glugas's, while the kettle is boiling. She lapped slower, then licking the saucer clean. Why are their tongues so rough? To lap better, all pores holes. Nothing she can eat. He glanced round him. No. Big bracket here. Mr. Bloom is wondering whether he can have ham and eggs, but there's been a lot of rain recently. There's the word drought, as in drought. On quietly creaky boots, he went up the staircase to the hall, paused by the bedroom door. She might like something tasty. Thin bread and butter she likes in the morning. Still, perhaps, once in a while. He said softly in the bare hall, I'm going round the corner. Be back in a minute. And when he had heard his voice say it, he added, You don't want anything for breakfast? And there we leave it. Next week, we go out of doors with Mr. Bloom as he goes in search of something to eat with relish. And now our odyssey has truly begun. When he was asked to explain his system of Ulysses, Joyce gave this chapter the name Calypso. Nothing to do with the lovely rhythmic West Indian song form. The word calypso is actually a cousin of the word apocalypse, and if an apocalypse is a revelation, then a calypso, or Greek calypsis, is a covering up. And it comes from Homer. And what happened to Odysseus? And who was Calypso? In the weeks to come. Join me again next week for more of Rejoice and Mr. Bloom. And do be aware that now you can buy the first 13 of these podcasts in an ebook at a price of $3.99. Rejoice, episode 159, Stamps and Hatbands. Hello, I'm Frank Delaney, and let me remind you, the first dozen of the Rejoice podcast transcripts is now available as an ebook from Amazon at $3.99. But the podcast is free. Well, that didn't last long. I said last week that I'd approach this chapter differently, that I'd, so to speak, translate as I went along. I'd still do that, but by now you've probably realized that once we get into Mr. Bloom's streams of consciousness, we're done for. We have to stop, look, and listen. Last week, we met him for the first time, and as we parted from him, this gentle, decent, 38-year-old Dublin Jewish advertising salesman was getting ready to go out and find something for breakfast. Before he goes, though, he wants to find out whether his wife Marion, or more famously Molly, has any special requests. And here's the overlap from last week. He said softly in the bare hall, I'm going round the corner, be back in a minute. And when he had heard his voice say it, he added, You don't want anything for breakfast? And now we begin this week's episode. A sleepy, soft grunt answered. No, she didn't want anything. He heard then a warm, heavy sigh, softer as she turned over, and the loose brass quoits of the bedstead jingled. Must get those settled, really. Pity. All the way from Gibraltar. Forgotten any little Spanish she knew. Wonder what her father gave for it. Old style. Ah, yes, of course. Bought it at the governor's auction. Got a short knock. Hard as nails at a bargain, old Tweedy. Yes, sir, at Plevna that was. I rose in the ranks, surname, proud of it. Still, he had brains enough to make that corner in stamps. Now that was far-seeing. End of text. Okay, here we go. Molly's sleepy, soft answering grunt is written MN. Joyce's onomatopoeia is, as we'll discover again and again, simply wonderful, acute, pointed to the event, great or small, and, as onomatopoeia must be, accurate to the musical note. Amen. Then we have, no, she didn't want anything. This is tricky. What is it? Second-person narrative? It's Joyce reporting Bloom's thought, so we're seeing it from two points of view at once. Neat, huh? Now, here comes Joyce, the third-party narrator. He heard then a warm, heavy sigh, softer, as she turned over, and the loose brass quoits of the bedstead jingled. That's a word picture with sound added. And the rest of the paragraph is all pure stream of consciousness, internal monologue, which is mostly how we'll encounter Leopold Bloom by that intimate method of characterization, and also by the response to him of his fellow Dubliners all that day and into the night. Here are his next 3 thoughts. Must get those settled, really. Pity, all the way from Gibraltar. The brass rings on the bed have come a little adrift, the quoits, and he muses about repairs to them, and regrets that they should be damaged at all. They came from Gibraltar, as did Molly in one incarnation of her life, but that was a long time ago, and by now, in terms of language, she has forgotten any little Spanish she knew. Mr. Bloom then speculates as to how much Molly's father paid for the bed in Gibraltar. Wonder what her father gave for it. And he adds the note, old style, which of course refers to the father as much as to the bed. And then he remembers, yes, of course, bought it at the governor's auction. Molly's father was in the British military in Gibraltar, and the bed was knocked down to him almost immediately the bidding began, by arrangement, of course. Got a short knock, that's what a short knock is. The auctioneer only says, going, gone, once. Mr. Bloom thinks on. Hard as nails at a bargain, old Tweedy, and now we learn that Mr. Bloom married a girl named Marion Tweedy, whose father was in the British forces, and that he had a distinguished career. And Mr. Bloom imagines him telling the governor of Gibraltar, or indeed telling his own son-in-law. Yes, sir, a plevna that was. I rose in the ranks, sir, and I'm proud of it. Now, this is very, very interesting. What's plevna doing here? In fact, what's plevna doing at all? 4 times mentioned in Ulysses. Plevna, or Pleven, is an old city in Bulgaria, and it was importantly under siege during the war in the 1870s between Turkey and Russia. Were there British forces involved there? I don't think so. So what was Major Brian Cooper Tweedy, father of Marion Tweedy Bloom, doing there? Good question. So far as I can establish, Mr. Bloom has on his shelves, in 2 volumes, A History of the Russo-Turkish War by Henry Montague Hosier. It was published in 1877. Captain Hosier was already a known and respected military historian. In this particular history, the siege of Plevna is detailed. It lasted 143 days. It led to Romanian independence from the Ottoman Empire, and so far as I can see, there were no British troops there. But we'll delay a fuller judgment as to why Plevna is mentioned here until we come to it in later chapters, particularly chapter 17, also known in Joyce's schemata as Ithaca. So, here we have seen Joyce establishing deep credentials and characterization for Mr. Bloom, and he rounds it off with Mr. Bloom's thought of the valuable stamp collection that his father-in-law evidently had, and one specific concentration he had made. He'd bought up a stamp that became valuable. He'd made what the financiers call a corner in the market. After his mind mimics old Tweedy's boast, I rose in the ranks and I'm proud of it, meaning he didn't go into the army with a commission. He earned it, a rare thing in the British army, and the cause of much snobbery. A man who rose like that from the ranks to being an officer was referred to contemptuously by the commissioned officers as a ranker. There's a terrific novel, by the way, by James Kenway, and a movie on that subject called Tunes of Glory. After all that, Mr. Bloom's mind comments, still, he had brains enough to make that corner in stamps. Now that was farcy. We have time for one more short paragraph, I think. Yes. His hand took his hat from the peg over his initialed heavy overcoat, and his lost property office second-hand waterproof. Stamps. Sticky back pictures. Dare say lots of officers are in the swim too. Of course they do. The sweated legend in the crown of his hat told him mutely, Plasto's high-grade ha. He peeped quickly inside the leather headband. White slip of paper. Quite safe. Leopold Bloom wears a hat, and he owns an overcoat that he had made. The tailor sewed his initials in it. My grandfather had one. He also takes down his lost property office second-hand waterproof. I remember those sales. Every so often, lost property would be auctioned off by a city or a town or a transport company. I almost bought a portable typewriter at one such sale in Dublin. Somebody had left it behind in a bus. Mr. Bloom bought a raincoat, and he's still thinking of the stamps of his father-in-law. Stamps, sticky back pictures. Dare say lots of officers are in the swim too. Of course they do. Well, that's easy enough. In the swim is interesting, though. In one use of the word swim, it refers to a stretch of river that's known to be well stocked with fish. The phrase, of course they do, is a kind of leap forward past an earlier thought that he hasn't even needed to think. The thought is, they all know about such things. Of course they do. It's the less privileged's view of the privileged. They all know where the money is. And I love this next bit. The sweated legend in the crown of his hat told him mutely, Plasto's high-grade H.A. Plasto's was a hat shop in Dublin's Brunswick Street, later became Pierce Street, and Joyce wrote from Paris in April 1903 to ask his mother to send him a blue suit and a Plasto's hat. The letter T is missing from the word hat in the text, because either the sweat on the sweatband has obscured it, or the white slip of paper that he peers in to look for has hidden it. And he finds that it's blocking it. But I think it must be the sweat stain, because he doesn't want that piece of paper, which is quite safe in there, to protrude. And you'll find out why he doesn't want it to protrude and what's on the piece of paper. It's a secret piece of paper. You'll find that out next week. Don't forget, by the way, the first dozen of the Rejoice podcast transcripts is now available as an ebook from Amazon at $3.99. Back next week.